morning, folks. This is Talking Point here on WESN, your content capital. Sean Michael Small here once again to be with you, to speak about what's going on that's important to us in TNT, a land that was sweet, is sweet. I think perceptions vary, and it's understandable. One does wonder if, citizens in a nation somewhat live separate types of lives. It always is somewhat weird to me when I look at the various segments of our society and the demographics with regards to geography, social economics, not even necessarily with regards to race and religion, just with those two things, and to think of how different lives are based on, a variety of factors that should not matter in such a country as small as ours. Now, before I get into the review, I do want to bring up something, just one aspect of yesterday, because yesterday, well, I was somewhat emotional on a topic that I think is very important. And I was very afraid of the implications that stemmed from the story, one of the stories I was speaking about yesterday. And the content in this case doesn't necessarily matter to me. Because right now I'm here to say that I, Sean Michael Small, one of the people on this show that speaks, or probably the person on this show that speaks the most about communication, I had, how to put this, I don't want to say error. Error sounds too light of a weight. But I badly communicated yesterday. The point I was trying to make is secondary. How I was saying it was wrong. And the reason why I want to still bring that up is the fact that I am the one who criticizes people in public office and how they communicate. Because I want things to be done better. And of course, we all have our part to play as private citizens, but those who have any sort of a office or a platform have a responsibility. Now, in my case, I hold the latter. And it's very hypocritical of me to sort of try to hold politicians to a standard, and then I essentially went yesterday and broke that standard. And the main thing that I'm speaking about is the fact that regardless of if you agree with me or not, there was a comment I made, and one of my regular callers, Mr. San Fernando, he called me out on it, and rightfully so, that had no constructive purpose in part of the presentation yesterday. It was just me expressing my displeasure in a very crass way, unnecessary way, that it had no constructive purpose, but it also detracted from the message. And the thing is, some might say, well, you're emotional, it happens to people, you're only human. And that's fine, that's a reason. But a reason is not an excuse. And that's the thing. In my position, I feel compelled to say this because of my views on how it should be done in positions higher than mine. It's fine that you have reasons. It's fine to be human. It's fine to be imperfect. But we're not in a rum shop. We're not just a couple of private citizens on a street corner talking about our opinions. I'm speaking to a camera that might be seen by hundreds, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. In TNT, we really don't know what ratings numbers are. We could just go by how much recognition we get after the fact. And of course, elected officials, appointed officials speak to the nation, and it is assumed, it is hoped even, that the nation will pay attention when that happens. And you can have an off day. That's fine. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it so that, it's just an off day and you just kind of, no. Yeah, you have an off day, that's fine, but then you have to pay the dues and come after the fact and admit your wrongdoing and do what you can to fix it. Because the irony is, I was speaking about the reputation of our crime-fighting system, the criminal justice system. Meanwhile, I was harming my own reputation in similar manners. It was quite hypocritical now that I look back at it. And I just thought that it needed to be said. It could be an object lesson to anybody within the media who has to speak publicly, a politician, a head of some sort of office, some appointed official. Yeah, be willing to admit your mistakes. Try not to have them. Understand that no one's perfect. And don't make excuses and try to hide from them. Because again, the people will see it. People will see it and people will judge you for better or worse. And the more you try to hide it, the more harm you do to yourself and to whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. And just a quick case in point, there was a THA, one of the members of the THA, I think it's the Secretary of Infrastructure, he was in Martinique on Sunday and he took a private jet, I believe, back home to Trinidad. The point is, when they initially tried to contact him, it was reported that he hung up the phone. So it seems as though he was evasive. Now, the actual reality, to some extent, you know, what was he thinking, why he hung up the phone, there could be a whole host of reasons why. Right? But the fact that his comments that were pertinent, his reason, his explanation came afterwards, doesn't help. Because he said, well, I paid out of pocket, so there's no public money here. This was my plan, I paid for it out of pocket. Cool, right? Unless someone is able to show evidence, I'm willing to believe that. But it still kind of hurts his messaging when he didn't want to necessarily comment at this. Or maybe he just got disconnected, who knows? So perception is a hell of a thing. Managing it, well, to some extent, the speaker has to do it. Because there's an infinite number of different perspectives out there to interpret what it is we say. And let that be a lesson to politicians who want to be upset and get defensive. It's fine to be human, but your job is on a higher level than the average citizen, so the standards are not going to be like an average citizen. All right, let's run through some of the topics, some of the first topics for daily review before the break. Well, let's kick off the daily review. And the first actual topic I have today, new topic, there's some reports coming out with construction happening with the central block of the Port of Spain General Hospital. The minister was speaking to the press, and he basically outlined a general plan or intention for the facility. Wanting for, of course, it's not just going to be a hospital, but he wants it to be the region's premier teaching hospital. And potentially, the hope would be that this new teaching facility will help deal with some of the shortfalls of specialists. Pediatric cardiologists are one of them, MRI specialists, A&E nurses. The idea, of course, is they get educated while on the job. We've seen TV shows that kind of show the concept in its most basic form, let's be honest. And this is seeking to address, I mean, it'll provide, you know, a modern facility, hopefully, more beds in a clean, updated facility, hopefully. And it'll provide an opportunity to educate specialists, and that's one of the areas where our healthcare system is kind of having a deficit, running behind. The only thing I have with this, also he indicated that there were interests from parties in the UK. I don't think he specified if there were private interests, healthcare interests, financial investment interests, UK government official interests, because potentially if we have a teaching hospital in the Caribbean and it is implemented well, it could also be to some extent a means to kickstart education, tourism. Even if it's on a small scale, it could still potentially benefit our public health sector and our health sector on a whole. Here's my one concern. This block is supposed to be finished March of 2025, right? Initially, he said the first quarter, now he says March of 2025, fully open, which is only slightly better in the long run, in the grand scheme of things. But March of 2025 is potentially around the time of the next general election. The facility might be built, but what the Minister of Health, Terence Dansik, is speaking to is not just the construction, but then now having a wider system of what to utilize with this new building, right? That would need a lot more to implement it. It's not just going to be building it. It's not just going to be even supplying the equipment, but also the type of staff and building up the hierarchy, the organizational structure to really get this thing. If you want it to be world class, that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort. And it is going to potentially start right around the time where we might see some sort of transition with our government. It could be that, you know, the PNM might win, but cabinet could change. We don't know what those changes look like. Some of the senior ministers may or may not retire. We don't know for sure who will, although, you know, you hear rumors and you hear things. Of course, no election is guaranteed, so another party could come into power. We don't know what's going to happen. And then a project like this, which has these big hopes and dreams, which might actually even be able to be implemented by the government of the day, kind of stalls because the new government, even if they want to continue it, might not quite have the same vision or the same ideas. At the end of the day, you ever had an idea at work and then somebody else was left to push it through and it's just not working quite the same way. Sometimes it could be just as good or better, and it could also very often be kind of halfway or worse. What the minister is saying, and there's not a lot of necessarily details here of how it's going to be done, the nitty-gritties, but the idea isn't bad, and it would be great if it could be done, and it potentially could help hit two birds with one stone. We have problems with our health sector. We have problems with our doctors graduating and needing to get jobs. And this could also help give us one more notch on our belt to attract some sort of travel internationally. And maybe it will, you know, also could be a model of how to integrate the region. If this is going to be the best teaching hospital in the region, then, or premier teaching hospital, then how that's managed as a regional asset and how that engages with the region and benefits the region, whether it's doctors from or graduates from other parts of the Caribbean coming here to do specialty training, or just providing, you know, helping to provide healthcare in various ways regionally through sending out. You know, you could do training here, but you could also just have programs to make it more accessible. You know, the better it is. People travel across the country in the United States, across Europe for healthcare, depending. You're not going to find the best in every city all the time in the United States. We shouldn't necessarily expect every Caribbean island to be a silo unto itself, to have the best of everything. We could specialize. And there could be a specialist premier hospital of something in another Caribbean country where some of our citizens will travel to. This could all be a pilot project for that, even unofficially, to see how it goes. I'm just worried that the actual implementation, if this was at the start of a term, as opposed to near the end, although the actual construction has been going on longer than it, but unfortunately it's more than just the construction. So we have to wait and see if this actually could amount to anything, or if we'll end up just having another hospital. One of many. It might be big, it might be nice, it might be new, it might have new equipment and capabilities, but it's that and what the minister's concept that he floated to the press yesterday as two different things. Before the break, I'll just go into the second topic there, and this is kind of somewhat disappointing and yet at the same time surprising, as there was another situation of vandalism. This time, it was reported that adolescent males, let me just see if I could get the adolescent males were throwing stones at a temple. They damaged several cars. They also potentially could have hit. I'm not too sure if they were aiming for it, but apparently the stones came close to hitting individuals in the compound. They were throwing stones at a temple. There's pictures in the press of damage to vehicles. 2 daily newspapers reported on it. They have different pictures of different cars being hit. Now, the head of the interreligious organization, he said that not all cases may be a result of intolerance, right? And he calls on the police to investigate each report. And that's fine. For him to say that, that's fine. Because he might know of specifics that maybe doesn't hit the press, and there might be more things that happen on a smaller scale. My concern is, once again, here we have, if it's not religious, if it's not based on intolerance, religious intolerance, it's still to some extent property damage, vandalism, potential violence, because no one was actually hit and no one was actually hurt. And then I'm left wondering, if it's not intolerance, what is the motive? Because it's not a robbery. I could understand someone robbing a temple or a church, and then, it's not always going to be because they dislike that religion or religion in general. It could just be they want to rob something. All right. But to say to just commit acts of vandalism, could it be young people going after members of the community they disagree with on a social level? Could it be young people just being wild? Because it's not like we see this sort of thing happen elsewhere all the time, where people just throw stones at cars. So what is it about this case that motivated this? The obvious answer would be intolerance, right? That's the obvious one. And the last one that I spoke about yesterday, there was something that I believe hinted to that, because, and I don't know if I'm mixing up situations where there was a message that read a Bible passage. And maybe that was just one person in the group that wanted to put that. That doesn't reflect everybody that did the incident previous. But in this one, I don't know. I mean, to be fair, there's no actual evidence to say it is intolerance. But these sorts of things, here's the thing. These sort of things, if you get enough of it, regardless of what the motivation of the individuals are, at some point the victims are going to perceive it as a certain way, especially if it's only happening to them. Then it's only natural to think there's something unique about me that's causing them to attack me. What could it be? Could it be race? Could it be religion? I mean, it's not like we have a geographic war where, yeah, they have gangs that base their violence on who controls our territory. But we don't have people from Arima just traveling to Port of Spain to pelt cars in Port of Spain. So I will agree. It does need to be investigated, and hopefully it's taken, all incidents, no matter how small, are taken seriously and are investigated. Folks, let's take a break. When we come back, there's more to speak about, including, well, we had all the good news last couple of weeks about Dragon Gas and things looking good, but there are situations happening in Venezuela and right next to it that could potentially harm that arrangement. Not necessarily, but we'll talk more about that after the break. Stay tuned.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Let's Let the home store turn your house into a home you love. Get everything you need to give your home that special look and feel. We offer household items, lawn and garden, paint center, hardware, plumbing, lighting and electrical, toys and storage solutions. 5 convenient locations: 6th Avenue Barataria, The Falls at West Mall, Pennywise Plaza Shoguanas, C3 Center Branch and C3 San Fernando. Check out our Facebook page for more information and come visit us today. The Home Store. Turn your house into a home you love.
Alan's Funeral Home, Tunapuna. Relax. We know the loss of a loved one can be challenging, but we've got your back for all your funeral needs, from documents to the service and or burial. Let Alan's Funeral Home take care of you and your loved ones. We are located on the Eastern Main Road in Tunapuna. Call us today at 663-1829 or visit allansfuneralhome.com. Alan's Funeral Home. Let us take care of business.
You gave us the inspiration to be first. We gave you the solutions that put you first. You walked with us side by side, and we continued to serve you with pride. First Citizens celebrates with you 30 years of achieving dreams, shaping success stories, and painting brighter futures together. And together, we'll accomplish so much more. First Citizens, together, 30 and beyond.
From Maracas Bay to Arafita Avenue and Piaco, Richard's Bake and Shag brings the world's most popular fish sandwich closer to you. Open daily at all our locations.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the Home Store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shoguanas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue, St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street, Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop, Ariapita Avenue, Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
Welcome back to Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen. And before I get into a couple stories that I think bears or is important for us to keep our eye on with regards to Venezuela, who is supposed to be a strategic partner with regards to our own fossil fuel, natural gas needs. I do want to talk about just something just before that. That's with regards to the independent senators. There were several stories that came out in the daily newspapers yesterday with regards to their comments. And I would say it's commendable the messages that they wanted to have, because they were appealing to the best of us. They were appealing to what I guess you could say we at the very least, how we should hope the country should be, as opposed to talking down or going down into the gutter. And one could argue this is one of the major roles of the independent bench. They don't necessarily have to a stake in the elections or things like that. Now, one of the independent senators, Hazel Thompson, she made it a point to speak with regards to the perception of crime in the country, and the fact that she said it's not the poor and disadvantaged who commit crime, and then she went out to point out examples about, well, relatives of ministers have done things, been accused of things, been involved in things, been arrested for things. Then she also pointed out the stand your ground policy. But noting that while national security got a significant chunk of the budget, still not bigger than education, and I think health, she said that she brought up again the fact that the police can't be encouraged to use body cameras. She brought up the fact that, look, it seems as though wanting to investigate crimes doesn't always seem to be a given with regards to the police. But at the end of the day, one of the things that she said about the stand your ground policy, she said, be careful, it's not an eye for an eye policy. Kill before you get killed. But rather, it's stand your ground to save our young people, which one of our callers lamented maybe they're already lost. And it's that call there, it's to stand up to the situation as opposed to wanting to just fight fire with fire. I understand wanting to fight fire with fire, and sometimes it might be necessary. But not all of our issues are necessarily going to be dealt with in that way. Don't necessarily want to get too much into the details, but rather, I do want to come and look. What is the crux of the message? Stand up to try to save our young people. And I think that's something very important to hear. Another independent senator, he also, well, he asked for the police to be properly vetted. And I do find it interesting because good police, bad police, they all come from us. So at some point, I do wonder if it's just a matter of, this is Independent Senator Halon Francis. I believe he was one of the newly appointed independent senators, the youngest of the new crop. And he says, well, okay, crime is not the fault of any particular administration, but because of habits we have accepted as a nation. Then he goes on to say, well, vet the police. Do we need 1,000 police officers? Fine. We need more vehicles? Fine. But when you pick police officers, please pick the best. Well, the thing is, his opening statement, habits that we have accepted as a nation, I do wonder if the implication of that statement, if it dawns on him that to just say that we pick the best doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get 1,000 officers in what I will assume he wants them to look like with regards to their resume, for lack of a better way to put it. Because what is the best candidate? There are many things that will make a good candidate. What will be the best? Most people are not going to have all of the factors that make a good candidate for anything. They might have some of the factors. They might have a lot. But most people are flawed, so chances are they're going to have things that could potentially disqualify them. So I understand where he's coming from. And to some extent, he's appealing to the best of us, to find the best for the, and also what's unspoken is that the best stand up for service, right? At any day, if all we have is people who want to collect checks, go up to be police officers, and it doesn't matter what the criteria is, that is arguably all that we could recruit. So he's making an appeal. There are police officers who they went up there as a vocation, not just to collect a check. One could argue we need more of those to fill the new slots and less of the latter. Finally, one of the independent senators, she called for an end to tribal politics and the start of meaningful conversations about development in TNT. This is independent Senator Dr. Shada Patterson. And it might seem like an obvious thing, but to some extent, you kind of have to keep saying it. But when I read this, what struck me was the fact that, look, I understand the basics of it, you know, speaking against tribal politics, speaking against the Bmobile, but we have these talks, these crime talks that were proposed, and both sides seem to be going back and forth. They agree in principle. They agree to the basic premise of it. Let's meet, let's speak about crime. Let's try to resolve this issue as a collective government, not as a majority opposition scenario where we have to battle everything. The problem is, after the last series of talks, which it seemed as though the government said, well, 4 and 5, 5 of us, 4 of you, no outsiders, Prime Minister's not going to show up, and the opposition responded to that, we don't actually know if and how it's moving forward. At least I haven't seen anything. I've tried looking. Maybe I missed it. But right now, we had a lot of communication coming out about it like last week and the week before maybe. But this week, it's only Tuesday, haven't really heard anything about it. And crime is still at the forefront in the minds of a lot of people. So one would imagine, do they want to just let this issue die? Has it reached the point where the political dance is no longer benefiting anybody, so nobody has incentive to keep going? Was this all done in bad faith? Or is it just that we have two groups that can't get over themselves? It's a lot of minor squabbling. And it's not like a major big deal. It's not no major conflict. We're not talking about civil war here. We're just talking about two parties that they're just doing the same old dance. And they don't necessarily know how to not do the dance. That's the scary part. The scary part is you might want an end to tribal politics. And they might even be, the two parties might want to some extent end tribal politics. And I say that, and there will be people who will disagree with that statement probably. No, they like it so, they want it so. But at the end of the day, they might not know how to. They might not know how to come together. That's the interesting and scary part. The ability to communicate is too much potential, too much history, potentially too much complexity, complex feelings. So actually now, and it's probably going to be slow to work back to a point where our government can actually work together, both sides of the aisle. And perhaps these talks about crime, they could have kick-started a better political environment, but perhaps we all might have been naive thinking it's that easy to just say, let's have talks, and they have talks, and stuff gets done. Perhaps it's not so simple. Human beings, unfortunately, are complex. And this is, you know, the consequence of that complexity. All right. It's interesting how time just moves fast and waits for no one. But, sounds like something I said before. Two quick things that I wanted to mention. We have deals with Venezuela. And one of the issues was sanctions placed by the American government that prevented the deal. Then eventually we got a license of exemption, but we couldn't do transactions with cash, with money. We had to have repayments in kind. Then eventually we got a new license where it said now we could do cash. And this all falls in line generally around the same time where the United States is easing up on sanctions. And while this isn't directly said about our agreement, so it doesn't automatically means that it's going to be an issue directly related to us. The sanctions in general that were lifted from Venezuela was done with the caveat of free and fair elections. Meanwhile, that process has taken its latest step, with the opposition basically picking government critic Maria Corina Machado. I apologize if I pronounce the name wrong. Long-time viewers might realize that's a weakness of mine. And she was declared, she declared herself the winner early, although the trend of the results, it seemed as though she had 90+% of the vote. Of course, these are just the votes for the primaries for the opposition. So this is essentially to pick the opposition candidate to run in the hopefully next year's presidential elections in Venezuela. Now, you could just look at some of the reporting coming out of Venezuela. I think our local newspaper reported that state TV in Venezuela called it a farce. That is to say, the opposition's primaries. And then there was another article there that I found that calls her a far-right candidate, or says she's far-right. Venezuela is a socialist country, so it's just politics, right? You want to paint the other side in the negative, right? And using the term far is the extreme, the easiest way to do so. I don't actually know if she's far-right or not. She could very well be. She could be a nationalist. She could be right-wing and not far-right. She could be conservative. She could be a moderate conservative. She could be in the scale of Western democracy a liberal, but just in disagreement with the socialists that run Venezuela. It matters because she's technically been banned from elections, and no one's quite entirely sure what's going to happen if she was elected as the leading candidate, as the person to run against Maduro. Will she officially be allowed to run? And if not, then what does that mean for the sanctions? The complaint is that she praised the sanctions or encouraged the sanctions, but at the end of the day, to some extent, the sanctions are not democratic. The sanctions are unilateral. That's up to America if they want to continue with that. This is, ironically, the greatest lifting of Trump-era sanctions by the Biden presidency. If you disagree with them, you could have lifted them sooner. But they wanted free elections in Venezuela. I understand that. Will we actually get it? And if we don't get it, if they don't allow her to run, she got 90 plus percent. I think it's like 93 or 96. I can't remember. I think it's 93% of the vote as of the initial estimates last night. How will the states respond? And then what does that mean for our deal? Meanwhile, there's another story coming out of Venezuela that's concerning. And this time it's the president of Guyana. So we go from concerns with the US, and now we go to concerns with a CARICOM member and our neighbor, and one could argue one of our closer allies as a nation. Guyana's president, Dr. Irfan Ali, he put out, he published a press release on Facebook last night. We have it here just for you to see, but if you want to read it in detail, you could log in to his Facebook page, President Irfan Ali. And basically, he is concerned that Venezuela might be attempting to annex part of Guyana. Venezuela has claims over territory that, well, right now, I guess you could say is within the possession of Guyana. I haven't necessarily looked into the claims quite yet because there's a lot of technicalities, but I do believe internationally it's recognized as Guyana. Maybe I'm wrong about that. The point, though, is what is Trinidad and Tobago to do if some sort of heated confrontation now, escalation from the current status quo happens between Venezuela and Guyana? Violence might occur. It could not necessarily be to the scale, obviously, of Ukraine or even what we see in Israel-Palestine, but it could still be border clashes, skirmishes, and a whole host of accusations diplomatically between the two nations. We have deals with both to some extent, right? We have relations with Guyana, part of CARICOM. We have major gas deals with Venezuela. That, of course, you know, those decisions by our elected officials, that's up to them. But just the fact that there's potentially tension there, and that could translate to us. This is how alliances, I mean, international relations is not always too dissimilar, although this is an oversimplification, to just cliques and friend groups, right? The motivations now and the scale of the motivations is where it gets obviously a lot more complex and obviously very different. And then, of course, how the international community again responds to this. What will America say? Because right now, Guyana is potentially looking at significant amount of wealth for their society. But they also don't necessarily just want to lose land and lose members of their population just like that. Apparently, Venezuela is saying that they want to annex the land and nationalize all the people there and make them Venezuelan citizens. How that would work on an ethical level, I have no idea. Is it what the people want? To some extent, does it matter? There's a lot of heavy questions there. But the point is our dragon gas deal could once again be caught in the middle of other people's interests. And then what do we do? So far, Minister of Foreign Affairs and CARICOM Affairs, the Prime Minister, our government has been doing pretty well on the international front. So I hope that nothing blows up. And maybe we could even be someone to try to prevent that from happening. But once it does, it gets more complicated. I don't know. I'm just a bit concerned because there's also wider considerations of instability in the region. And we've already seen what happens when there was just instability in Venezuela. So this is the thing. What's going on in other parts of the world, there's symptoms to the wider problem. The wider problem is COVID recovery. Right now, Venezuela is making steps to recover its economic position, and I am all for that. But if this is one of those steps, we might have some problems, regardless of who we want to side with. We in TNT might have some problems. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, there's a aspect of the Israeli-Palestine conflict that we in TNT, we might be aware of, we might not be fully aware of, that's ongoing, that to some extent might even be more concerning, at least before the violence in Gaza went up to its current notch. So stay tuned. When we come back, we'll check in with our affiliates at France 24. We'll be right back.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today. The Home Store turn your house into a home you love. Get everything you need to give your home that special look and feel. We offer household items, lawn and garden, paint center, hardware, plumbing, lighting and electrical, toys and storage solutions. 5 convenient locations: 6th Avenue Barataria, The Falls at Westmore, Pennywise Plaza Shoguanas, C3 Center Branch and C3 San Fernando. Check out our Facebook page for more information and come visit us today. The Home Store. Turn your house into a home you love.
From Maracas Bay to Arafita Avenue and Piaco, Richard's Bake and Shark brings the world's most popular fish sandwich closer to you. Open daily at all our locations.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. And there is another aspect of this conflict between Israel and Palestine. Of course, those who have done any sort of reading will understand that there's a lot of history here, right? However, it's not just, it seems as though we might be forgetting, Palestine is not just Gaza. Gaza is just one part of Palestine. There's also the West Bank. And actually, there were more situations with regards to what was going on, concerns about what was going on in the West Bank for the last 5 to 10 years. Rather than Gaza, because of the displacement of people by settlers. And now that this situation has flared up with more than just, you could say, a single incident, but an ongoing escalation of violence, right? Where you have an attack and then you have retaliation, and there's a back and forth and trading of artillery and bombings going on, right? To whatever degree, not here to discuss that. The point is the violence is still kind of ongoing. There's no cessation right now. That has caused opportunity for others to advance their agenda through the use of violence. And we have a clip from our affiliate France 24 where a former Israeli IDF soldier, who is now the advocacy director in Israel for a group that is against the violence committed by settlers from his own nation against its neighbor. He is here to point out the risks, and I hope that if you have to pay attention to anything, pay attention to when he says about the authorities allowing this to happen. That is to say, the authorities of his own country, allowing violence to be inflicted on others, and how and why he thinks that's bad. So for more on this topic, we have our affiliate from France 24, so let's cue this.
While the war rages with the Gaza Strip, activists in Israel denouncing the displacement of hundreds of Palestinian Bedouins in the West Bank. Israel's army accused of abetting armed and hooded Jewish settlers intent on taking their land. For more, let's cross to Ori Givati, Advocacy Director of the Breaking the Silence Advocacy Group. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
There's been reports, most specifically about one incident on October the 12th, where hundreds of Bedouins were forced off their land.
Look, first of all, before I start talking about this issue, it's very important for me to say that we're not in usual times. I've been an activist about this issue for more than 7 years, and it's the most difficult times I remember. And from here, I will also call for the release of all hostages, many of them friends and family members of our group Breaking the Silence. And we have to speak about everything from that perspective of the war that's been going on in Gaza. And now to your question. Look, the incident you mentioned on the 12th of October is one of many. But what we're seeing today in the West Bank is a situation where the settlers are exploiting the fact that we are at war, that our country is at war, that all eyes are on Gaza, in order to proceed with their messianic goals very violently. This is not a new phenomena, but the extent of this phenomena has grown much, much larger since the beginning of the war. Just to give you a number, in the year before the war, settlers using settler violence managed to evict 7 Palestinian communities from their lands, which is terrible. But from the war, since the war, already more than 8 communities. Yeah. So that's just to understand how bad the situation is in terms of Palestinian communities that have to leave their land, sometimes decades, sometimes more than decades before the establishment of Israel, land that they were living in, as a result of the violence of the settlers.
And this is the West Bank, and we saw that report before we spoke to you, is where many feared that we'd have some kind of a major eruption before October the 7th, not the Gaza Strip. Your organization points to 2017 as this moment where these settlers started going really on the offensive. What happened then? Why?
Look, I think that when we look on settler violence and the way it's been growing, we need to start way earlier than 2017. We need to start from the day of the occupation. Yeah, the second that we decided as a country to move our citizens into the occupied area, yeah, in that minute, settler violence happened, and it's been growing ever since. And in recent years, yeah, it's been growing more and more, and the reason for that is, first of all, very simple. Yeah, when you allow someone to act violently and there is no law enforcement against them, and they are basically allowed to do what they want, there is no reason for them to do it less, right? When there is an opening to do it more, when it's an opening for the settler movement to fulfill its goals, which we have to understand and say very clearly. The goal is to push Palestinians away from their homes in Area C. That's the first step, yeah? Area C is 61% of the West Bank, and it's where all the settlements are, and also 300,000 Palestinians, which are mainly in rural villages, yeah? So these are the first targets for the settler movement. And before we even speak about the violence itself, we have to talk about the fact that we have over 120 settler outposts. Yeah, outposts are settlements that are illegal, not only in international law, but also in Israeli law. Yeah, And we are also not enforcing the law against these outposts, against the settlers that live in these outposts. Yeah. So when we allow generally the settlers to start breaking the law, very, very quickly it escalates to violence. And what we're seeing in recent years is the culmination of this with insane incidents, really insane. Like I'm sure before this war, many of the viewers heard about the incident in Hawara where settlers basically burned a village. Yeah, and also one of the Palestinians was murdered. And that was maybe a peak, but there is settler violence every day. You know, before the war, yeah, I'm talking now before the war, the average was almost 3 times settler violence incident per day. Yeah, and this is before the war. Since the war, we're talking about crazy numbers. I don't know, we don't have the data yet, but from what we're hearing from our partners, Palestinian partners, activists, organizations, the numbers are really unimaginable. And almost every day there is a Palestinian community that decides to leave their homes because no one is protecting them.
And just on this point, just to remind our viewers, these Bedouin communities, they're farmers, they're herders, and they too were victims on October the 7th.
Yeah, so look, it's a bit more complicated than that because the Palestinians that were, the Bedouins that were victims on October 7th are within the Green Line. The Palestinians we're talking about right now are in the West Bank, yeah? So there is a connection, but it's not the same exact communities. Yeah? It's important to remember that. But if I continue, the last point, which I think is very important to say to the viewers, is that according to international law and according also to basic principles, we have to remember that the occupying power today in the West Bank is our army, the army that I served in not that long ago, and the army that our testifiers and our members serve in until today. And according to that, the army is supposed to protect everyone in the area. Yeah? What we have been seeing throughout the years is a process that is now in its peak, that instead of protecting everyone in the area, meaning the settlers, but also the Palestinians, we're seeing a situation today that we as soldiers are sent to protect settlers that attack Palestinians. And this is the culmination of a process that started a long time ago, and basically is a policy. Yeah, and that policy allows the settlers and gives them state backing for the violent actions that they're taking part in. And that is something that is the core issue of this problem, because also in France and anywhere else, there are people who are violent and are trying to do terrible things to other people. Mm-hmm. But in most places, most functioning places, the police will stop them. But here, the police, which is in the West Bank, is the military, is protecting the violence.
Ori Givati, one quick final question. For too long, the international community forgot about the Middle East. Now we're all paying attention. Does that mean that those people have hope that in the future there will be pressure to protect them?
I think that what we're seeing now must remind everyone that we cannot continue with this concept of managing the conflict, meaning it goes on, Israel occupies, and there is some violence, but it's not that bad. Yeah, what we saw in October 7th is one of the things we saw is that we cannot go on like this. We cannot. And it's true for Palestinian communities in the West Bank. It's true for Israelis around Gaza. It's true for Palestinians in Gaza. It's true for all of us from the river to the sea. That's what we have to understand. And the international community has to understand, and I'm saying it as an Israeli, that it has a role here, and it needs to help us Israelis to end this, because it's not good for anyone in this area.
Well, it's a hell of a thing. I tend to prefer to try to get contrarian views from people from that side, whichever topic it is. It could be politics, it could be ideology. In this case, there's a conflict going on, and we have a former member of the IDF, Ori Givati, who he's the head of an advocacy group that has partners with Palestinians. The video that I showed last week also included our peace advocates that had Palestinian parties, that had sources speaking to the other side. It wasn't just they were acting in isolation. And I think that's interesting to hear now. It was secondary to what he said, but it's interesting to get that confirmation. And look, they have people on both sides of the national borders that are still hopeful to end this thing. But the main thing why I wanted to show this clip was, one, yes, to show people, look, there's a wider issue. And the gentleman said it best. They were and also the presenter from France 24. There were thoughts that it would have been the West Bank where violence might have erupted on October the 17th, not necessarily from Gaza. And for whatever reason, that turned out to happen. That could be figured out later by historians and investigators and so on. But the reason why people thought that was because the situation devolved to this point where you have active violence going on. And I did think that to some extent, I wondered perhaps if there's a lesson to be learned there where you have people committing violence and it's being supported by policy. And I'm not saying that what has been advocated for in TNT has gone that far and is that bad, but I am saying this is where it could end up. Right? This is where it could end up eventually after quite a few steps, to be fair to everybody. And it would take quite a lot more degradation to some extent to our moral fiber for it to get there. But the point still remains that the risk is there. But it also shows now, to some extent, you know, when the police just kind of sit back and do nothing, when they just want to maintain the status quo. He said it himself, where people, the international community, they just want to observe the situation and maintain the status quo. The police in this case is the military of Israel. But I do wonder to some extent that that's also pertinent to our local situation. Some of us might be fine with the status quo, not just the politicians, but private citizens as well, for whatever reason. Maybe we just think that we can't have it better, so the status quo is fine, so let's maintain the status quo. Or we don't put any thought into it, into if it could change, how it could change, if we're willing to make it change. We don't really think about it. We just kind of, stay in our lane and let it sort itself out. Whoever's involved, let them have to deal with it. And however it works out, it works out. You know? Say, que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. But he pointed to the fact that, look at what just monitoring the situation and upholding the status quo and keeping things stable, but not necessarily solving the problems, look at what it caused. And I would argue that we have a lot of those situations in various aspects of our society and economy. And it's not, as one of the independent senators said, it's not a party problem. It's not a PNM problem or a UNC problem or NTA problem or pick your party, or a PDP problem or a TPP problem. It's a national problem. And we can't expect one party just to, you know, appeal to the woodwork or to just rise to the occasion and figure it all out for everybody else. The status quo, to some extent, we all do our part to keep it, to uphold it. Why are the politicians then going to try and change it? Because one could argue they get indications that we like it so. And in some ways we do. There are a lot of the minor law breakings that a lot of citizens just casually have no issue with and regularly participate in. And that's why some of the callers to the show, like the professor say, enforce all the laws. It might seem like a tall task now because we have to start from the bottom. But the fact of the matter is, if we did it from the start, it could happen. So there are lessons to be learned. Not necessarily, you know, the same scenario. Obviously not, right? But there are lessons to be learned. And while we might not necessarily suffer the same fate and the same exact consequences, we could suffer similar things, slightly similar, but similar enough in the sense that it will be negative. All right. let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll open up the phone lines. And of course, everyone, you're free to call in about whatever you want to speak about. You don't have to speak about what I spoke about, or you could feel free to grill me and criticize me, whether it's something I said today or yesterday. And like I said, your boy, he made more than just a boo-boo yesterday. Got too emotional and was very, very, what's the word? For the whole morning, I think I've been trying to think of this word. I haven't really been constructive, or I wasn't constructive with my approach yesterday. And now I have to be willing to admit it and face it and try to be better and call other people. If I want them to be better, I have to be better. But we'll get more into that after the break. Let's just take a quick break and we'll open the phone line. Stay tuned.
Since they were on sale, Laura bought these umbrella shoes without thinking. Literally, without thinking. Hungry for deals? You'd better come and satisfy it at KFC before doing something crazy. Wow Bucket, 7 pieces of chicken and 4 regular sides for $115. A finger-licking good deal.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios, but they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
You gave us the inspiration to be first. We gave you the solutions that put you first. You walked with us side by side, and we continued to serve you with pride. First Citizens celebrates with you 30 years of achieving dreams, shaping success stories, and painting brighter futures together. And together, we'll accomplish so much more. First Citizens, together, 30 and beyond.
Alan's Funeral Home, Tunapuna. Relax. We know the loss of a loved one can be challenging, but we've got your back for all your funeral needs, from documents to the service and or burial. Let Alan's Funeral Home take care of you and your loved ones. We are located on the Eastern Main Road in Tunapuna. Call us today at 663-1829 or visit allansfuneralhome.com. Alan's Funeral Home. Let us take care of business.
My name is Carl Media. I'm the founder and the host of Ever Increasing Voice Ministries. Join me every Saturday and Sunday on WESN, this powerful station, at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. nightly. Also on Sundays, I'll be on at 7 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. at night time. When you come here, we are getting people heavenly ready.
Welcome back to Talking About, ladies and gentlemen. And now we'll open up the phone lines. Want to hear from you, the viewer. You could speak on whatever topic you wish to bring up. The ones that I spoke about, whether you agree, disagree. Of course, you know, Mr. San Fernando, you could call in. I would very much like to continue, well, to have a discussion on the other aspects of what you were saying, because I do find it interesting. It seems as though we've disagreed to some extent on that point for quite some time. Even though, you know, I remember some of your earlier contributions in the year, and it still took me by surprise. And I am curious with regards to why you have that position so strongly. The strength of the position, how strongly you feel on it, I think is what took me by surprise. And while we wait for callers, it does lead me to something that I was just thinking about after contemplating, the position of the independent senators, contemplating my own positions out of the callers. I do wonder if we no longer, and this is a phenomenon you can see around the world, and I don't know if we ever really had. So to say that we no longer have a forum where we could get a pretty good idea of the national consensus and rehash the various perspectives. I'm not too sure if we ever really had that, to be fair, but I do wonder if the need for that now more than ever might be upon us, because the perspectives with regards to crime, even the independent senators and their approach and what they had to say, it was all their perspectives. They weren't necessarily wrong, but you could see that the approaches were different. The mindsets were different compared to myself, compared to compared to all of the callers potentially, compared to the media ambassador ASP Ali. Although, well, I mean, his mindset and perspective would be quite different naturally. And I do wonder if, to some extent, we need wider forums in order to have these discussions. One of the ways that it's done is when you see, like in the States, and they have presidential candidates debating, it's not just debate, it's also the filtering from various forums through the representatives at different levels, all the way up to the national candidates for the president, which is ultimately, from each party is 2 people. And at that point, some, not necessarily all, of the issues gets debated where, the 2 representatives of either side to some extent talk about their side's various perspectives. But that potentially oversimplifies things. The other thing is that you do have a growing media industry on the internet, which now acts in some ways as like a forum or a town hall, a voice for people to air their opinion in various ways, and then it's filtered by the various personalities. And those who do a good job of being responsible at that position tend to be the ones being rewarded most of the time, and then it allows for somewhat of a consensus to be gathered. Because part of what might make this situation difficult is if we all have different perspectives and different desires on how to see this through, we might not necessarily be willing to accept the government's plan if the government's plan doesn't include whatever it is that we want, or include things that we don't want, which is a hell of a thing. It's a hell of a thing. It's not necessarily that I'm making excuses for the government, to be fair to the population, I guess you could say. But the situation with regards to communicating our actual wants and desires, and I brought this up, I believe, before the budget and during the internal government elections. It's a complex situation that we don't necessarily know. In fact, even the politicians themselves might not be fully understanding of all of the intricacies of it, but they're on the receiving end, so they would have an idea. And I'm just saying, perhaps we need a better way to figure that out. Because I do feel that there's disconnect, and it's not all just because somebody has an agenda that's selfish and immoral. I mean, there's corruption, don't get me wrong. But there's also issues that we have in just basic practical matters with regards to governance. We have a caller from Chaguanas. Good morning, caller.
Morning.
Morning.
Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm all right, I'm all right.
All right. Now, with this thing in Israel,
Yes.
between Israel and the Palestinians,
Yes.
America and England knew that would happen a long time ago. It's the same thing they did in Rwanda. Okay? And as long as the people are occupying the land and, like there's no kind of redress, then, it's going to go on for decades. I only hope, they come to their senses, the politicians, and straighten things out. Or it can be very ugly. Okay. Take care.
Thank you, caller. One could argue that it already is very ugly and it has been ugly for quite some time. I think the point you made about Rwanda is quite correct. Here's the one thing though. A lot of people get upset when America plays world police. Of course, usually, to be fair to your point, it's because America plays world police when, you know, they have an interest. Oh, it's the oil, Iraq. They attacked us, Afghanistan, let's go there and play world police. They tried it in Somalia. And then you had that whole thing that happened in Mogadishu that, you know, a lot of people died, didn't really accomplish anything. And this was a civil war situation in Somalia. The Clinton administration tried to intervene. It wasn't very effective. It became a controversy in America because American service members died for no actual gain. Probably if the intervention actually succeeded. And there was a UN peacekeeping mission as well, but there was a separate American force. And if they actually were able to accomplish what they were trying to accomplish, maybe the public would have accepted the casualties, but it wasn't, so they didn't. And more importantly, a lot of Somalians were killed in various ways with that direct intervention. We have so I'll just say there are reasons why intervention, politicians don't necessarily want to go there right away. It's very controversial though when you think about all of the times they did and did not. We have a caller from Claxton Bay. Good morning, caller, you're on here.
Morning, Sean.
Morning.
Yeah, well, I really was going in this country now, boy. You go into the Hindus' temple and take any of this cabinet you're doing. Look what happened to some in Kali there. And if I tell you something, I had an experience with that too. You know, one of my relatives passed out. You know, with a certain rites, like when you finish born, you go the next day and do the morning rituals, you do the certain thing. You know, when you went to the next day, people sacrificed 8 chicken on the fire with the bone. It was so traumatized to us that was the last rite I drove for our family. We couldn't do it, you know. You know, they're going to do a lot of things. And now I'm not blaming nobody because we didn't see who do it. You understand me?
Yeah.
I'm not blaming nobody. But that is wrong. You know, the traumatized they put us through. It was hurting more than you had to burn your family, to see about your family. It was more traumatized than that. You understand me?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's my take. So I think people should have love in them. Yeah, listen up, Pedro.
Thank you, caller. Yeah. The thing is, it's difficult to know what to make, because the head of the IRO, he did say, you know, it might not be intolerance, but then what could it be? Because it doesn't really make much sense otherwise. Granted, violence doesn't have to make sense. Sometimes it is random and stupid and foolish and malicious just for the sake of it. Not all criminals are poor and disenfranchised people who have a chip on their shoulder. Some of them are rich and ambitious, and some of them are just mean and cruel. You know, there's various different motivations behind it. You can never necessarily tell automatically which one it is. It's not just, you can't just attribute it to one. But I don't know. It's just, this is the kind of thing that could form wider cracks. It could form wider cracks. Especially when religion is concerned. To some extent, religion is concerned in Israel and Palestine. It's also a lot of nationalistic politics, nation against nation. It's not just religion alone. But domestically, that's one of the things that you have to look out for. You don't have nation versus nation, because that also gives you different levels to try to come to a peaceful resolution, right? You could bypass the religious dynamic and go straight to the political dynamic and the international relation mechanisms. But when it's domestic now, and you get a sense that there's tension between whichever group, it could be religious or what have you, you don't have quite the same things. And for whatever reason in human history, just as they have some people who want to come together, they have people who prefer, no, let's stay apart. And sometimes it could be because the people in charge that want to stay apart, they want to do so because they want to hold on to their corner where they're king. And if we come together, they might not be as highly valued anymore. Or they want to reinforce their base. And perhaps that could be an explanation with regards to our politics and why our politicians seem to be more concerned, it seems, about reinforcing their base as opposed to trying to attract new supporters and trying to work with other entities in a constructive way, as opposed to just trying to secure deals and arrangements and, you know, be very cutthroat in the negotiations. Because everybody's concerned about their own little corner of the world, or the country, or the politics. Meantime, though, these sorts of things, you know, the average citizen does not necessarily look to their religious body that they belong to or their faith as a, well, the average person in peaceful nations, I guess you could say, don't necessarily look to those things to be a source of conflict. So for the average person, it will be very upsetting, especially when you have important things like funerals involved. That you have to go to a place of worship, generally speaking, to conduct a funeral. That's what most people of faith do. And there are other important milestones in one's life that you go to a church or a temple for. And to have that interrupted, desecrated, assaulted, and it's not to say that religious people are perfect and non-religious people are imperfect, or one religion is greater than another religion. We could believe what we want to believe. The question is if we're going to be able to prevent that. And I was trying to say this yesterday, but we didn't have much time. Believe what you want to believe. Understand the complexity of what that means. And don't let those complexities get between you and having peaceful, harmonious relations with someone of a different religion to you. History has examples of people of different religions being able to not just work together, be close friends, be significant to each other, trust each other, despite the fact that technically they disagree on something very basic and fundamental to their each individual identity. I want to hope that in TNT that's what we have. But I don't know how robust it is. I'm not saying that we don't have it. I'm just saying that it might be fragile depending on circumstances. And this is something that we should try to nip in the bud as soon as possible. We have Shagona on the line. I don't know if it's the same caller. Good morning. Caller, you on here?
Good morning.
Morning, Professor.
You spoke about the Venezuelan matter with Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
But you did mention what I consider to be the most important part. And that matter went with both parties concerned to arbitration. And the Venezuelans lost in the arbitration.
Right, yes.
They come back now and try to say, oh, the British people should be involved, and that's the only argument. You can't bring up an argument in arbitration without raising it during it, the arbitration. So as far as I'm concerned, Venezuela has no case. That is why they resisted all attempts to go to international bodies to determine the matter. And this is really business. That will take a day and a half to discuss, because that go back to the days when might was right. And the crux of the matter, in my opinion, have to do with during the last World Wars, when the Palestinian people was with the Ottoman Empire, and they backed the they went against the Western powers, and they lost. And with war, when you lost in war, the victors share the spoils. And that was how Israel ended up in that position. The present position I have, well, the one argument they have against Israel is that the United Nations rule that they should give back certain lands. But Israel cannot do that, because I talk about giving back the Golan Heights and things like that. Anytime Israel do that, Israel finish. Because that's what saved Israel in the 7th War. The first thing Moshe Dayan went and do is grab things like that, which is key to the defense of that area. And to go and give it back now is stupidity. And it was present point in time, but I find very disconcerting is the way the Hamas fight. They stand out in the middle of the people and bomb Israel, and when they bombard them, they claim they killing innocent people, and they're the one who sit down with it.
Mm-hmm.
You hear they take hostages of people not involved in the fighting. Right? Those things, I mean, so basic as inhuman. Not although you could find things that the Israelis do that is not proper, they pale in comparison to what the Hamas and these people are doing. Any questions before I come?
No. So I'll say this as you're still on the line. I don't know if it pales in comparison to what Hamas is doing. It's different, and yes, there are certain things.
Give you an example.
Well, they are certain.
They fight against the people who attack them.
It's just right now. I don't know if Israel is actually effectively fighting back, and a lot of civilian casualties are not necessary. I don't know if they're actually hitting any targets of value, and then there's civilian casualties that are collateral damage, and even then that is not not
most
preferred.
of the fighting I see Israel doing recently is against attacks against it.
Well, I mean, I understand.
Going there and grab all these people.
I understand exactly what you mean. Though. Israel does have a right to defend itself and to retaliate against Hamas. I just don't know if Hamas is bearing the brunt of the retaliation.
Well, you see, Hamas can't bear it because they hide among the people.
Yeah.
And when you go up there, they go sit down and say, I am a Hamas.
Well, of course.
That is the way they fight. The Israeli, on the other hand, have an army fighting.
All right, Professor. Okay. We have to close the show, so I'll end there. And I think that generally, the professor had a day and a half, and I agree with him. I don't know if there's any good way to get peace in this situation. At the end of the day, so many things that Israel has done, like what I showed the clip of, it was presented by an activist in Israel. I don't agree with that. But some of the other things are what the professor said. Look, Israel had fought several wars with its neighbors, and it took certain lands potentially for its strategic value, like the Golan Heights, because of the dominating position, the elevation over the surrounding area west of it. So I can't argue with that. After winning multiple wars and then taking land that has strategic value in those wars, I don't see any reason why they should give it back, especially when most of those wars weren't started by Israel. However, this situation is different. It's not the same. Israel is involved in both, but it's not the same. And I don't know what the international community is willing to do to try to intervene, because sanctions ain't going to stop it. By the time sanctions come into play, it's not going to, it might already be over. The one good thing is here we have a former member of the IDF who's saying there are other former members of the IDF who agree with me, who want to be advocates for peace and who want to rein in the excesses of our own country. And he said that some of the hostages are friends and family of people he knows and works with. That's the irony of the situation. Some of the hostages were probably the ones willing to Because what's going on in the West Bank is not what's necessarily going on in Gaza. Work alongside Palestinians in Gaza and have communication with Palestinians in Gaza. There are some Palestinians in Gaza, I believe, well, they're either employed by Israelis in businesses in Gaza or in businesses on the other side of the border. And also they communicate, they talk, they have relations. So this is not the first time I've seen a peace activist say some of the hostages are essentially their own people. It puts them in a bit of a bind, and yet they're still willing to say we want to try to figure this out peacefully with our neighbors, not work against them. If only we had more people with that sort of mindset, that even when bad things happen to you, your eyes are still on the ball, and you still have the goal in mind. And in our political arena, I don't know if we have that. And maybe the stakes are not as high, so then the motivation is not quite the same, but still. Meanwhile, hopefully, that region of the world does not escalate further. There are signs that it could. And if it does, we need to be ready for a whole host of inflationary shocks that could happen as our economies go further out of whack ever since COVID and the recovery. And we've been out of whack even before COVID with our foreign exchange situation. So it's why these things are important to you, the viewer. You might think it's far removed, and if some people want to protest, that's fine, but I have nothing to do with me. It has something to do with you. It has something to do with you. We like to import our ideologies and our responses to things. We'll import what media says. But we need to forge our own path. We want to have our own sovereignty. We need to stand up on our own. And in part do that for our own problems. As my coach always says, folks, you can make today a good day. I want to thank the callers for calling in. We will see you tomorrow morning. Good lady should be with me. Bye-bye.
WESN.
I am Rondell Donowa, and you are watching WESN, the content capital.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit?
Yes.
What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.